So today, the topic is reincarnation, return, and recurrence. So these three things are often mixed up, and uh, what we try to do in this particular session is untangle them so that we can understand the reality of each of these three different aspects of our spiritual development. The return and the recurrence are laws. Reincarnation in itself is not a law. Okay, so we'll just begin by saying reincarnation is where somebody, uh, and we'll talk about this in more detail a bit later on, chooses to enter their next physical body, and they choose the physical body they are going to incarnate into. So in this school, in these sessions, the word reincarnation is not given the same specific emphasis as it is in other schools and teachings. People say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to reincarnate into a butterfly, or reincarnate into a king, or all this stuff." That's a different thing. Reincarnation specifically is what we're going to talk about in a while, okay? But what we are going to talk about in more detail is return, and we've touched on this already in previous weeks. If you remember, we talked about the Wheel of Samsara, and we're going to return to that a little bit for the law of return. And then we also have the law of recurrence, as you can see there on the right hand side. So we're going to talk about all these things, and we're going to come back to reincarnation. And once we've talked about return and recurrence, you may well see why we kind of define reincarnation in a different way to other schools to help us understand what happens between lives. If you remember last week, we were talking about the ray of death and the way in which the ray of death links the existences we have in the Wheel of Samsara. And each time we come back to a existence, we are returning, obviously. And returning is something that everything in nature does. For example, planets, as you can see, come back to the same place they were in originally because they're in an orbit. Okay. We know that in terms of life, the return between the uh, current existence and the next is something which is a mechanical law or process. In other words, return is something that happens to everything, everybody, every solar system, every person, every flower, whatever you want to pick a thing, it's going through in some way or another the law of return. And we can even talk about it in terms of our energy. Remember, we've looked at this picture before, and this picture on the right is showing the Ouroboros, and we have the elements of nature in that image as well: the fire, the earth, the air, the wind, the air, etc., the water. Everything is moving through return. And when a human, or when an essence is in the human kingdom, it returns to a new existence, lives the same life, but in a different, obviously, different physical body, in a different time, you could say, a different stage. the everything is relived from the same starting point. And if you remember in the Wheel of Samsara, you can see that I'll just move us all. We move. Oh, I've lost my cursor. Oh dear, what's going on? Right, my cursor. Get that out of the way. So you can see here in the top right of the picture the 108 existences which we have in the human kingdom. So each of those existences is divided by the ray of death, which we talked about last week. But each time we come back, we are influenced by the law of return. And if you remember in those discussions last week when we talked about the ray of death, we were beginning to refer to the law of return as well. So that whole process, which we've talked about before here in the 108 lives, is something which is impacting all of us. Similarly, this law of recurrence is occurring to all of us because the law of recurrence, a mechanical law, is the repetition of events and circumstances due to the repetition or manifestation of the ego within our psyche. So the ego manifests, and the same egos, which we haven't done any work inside us, so that means the same egos exists, which means the same dramas occur and the same actors, the egos, are still in those same returns or existences. So the recurrences are within the returns, but they are in a different scenery, a different time. And they are influenced by karma, which we're going to talk about next week. So it is not necessarily negative or bad that we are going through any particular recurrence in any moment. But what is important for us as students of Gnosis is the way we deal with that recurrence, how we behave in front of the manifestation of any particular ego, which we've carried from the last life into this life. So as we return, remember, again, we said this a few weeks ago, we get to the point where the ego is able to manifest through our personality, and the same ego are in there if we've done no inner work. So therefore, that same ego will manifest again. So if we are able to be conscious in that moment, to have our essence active and are able to observe and then ask our divine mothers to eliminate that ego, we are behaving in a good way in front of that particular recurrence. Okay. And in fact, when we eliminate an ego with the help of our divine mother, any particular ego, any detail, then we are changing our life here and in the next life, obviously, because the recurrence is being directly influenced by the inner work that we are doing. So we can think about this another way. So here is a normal life. We are born and eventually we die. But in that existence, we have those circles, those little colored circles, which are supposed to represent different circumstances or events or situations where any particular ego is manifesting. Okay. So we can say that if you stretch that life out as a flat line rather than being a circle, we are born, and then during that life, as you can see, we have many situations where it says some egos act. Okay, they act, and then eventually at the end of our life, we die. So that was an existence, one of the 108 existences. Now, you can see we then come back in the next existence, and the same egos manifest, not necessarily in the same order, but generally in the same order, okay, because of which the way we live our life. And the same events occur in our life, and then eventually we die. And then you can see in the third line there, the another example where we come back again and we're going to live the same existence with the same psychological egos manifesting as what we would call recurrence. So recurrence is happening in every return. We have a return, we come back for another existence, and in that return, we have a recurrence. And that recurrence in itself is a mechanical process. And to be able to free ourselves from these two mechanical laws, return and recurrence, we need to understand not only how they operate, but the fact that they're there. Okay, they were actually part of those laws. All of us are living in this moment through the law of return and the law of recurrence. We also need to understand that in those three examples, those three existences there, which are drawn from born to die, born to die, born to die. If we don't do any psychological work with the help of our Divine Mother, then the egos themselves will, as you would expect, manifest in that particular existence, and they will feed on energy from the human machine. Now, if you remember, probably about, I'm guessing now, 8 weeks ago, we talked about the human machine, and we talked about the 5 inferior cylinders, as the master calls it, of the human machine: the intellectual center, the motor center, the emotional center, the instinctive center, and the sexual center. Those centers where energy is transformed, everything we eat, everything we comes in as an impression, and everything we breathe all gets transformed into energy in those 5 centers. And then the ego tries to steal that energy when we are identified or fascinated, not in the moment. And the ego then grows. So in each return, if we don't do any inner work, then the egos will grow and get stronger or become fortified because there's no psychological death. And at the same time, this generates, this process, as you would expect, more defects. We become more complicated. Okay. Lots more psychological stuff is occurring because we're not doing any work to clean our psyche out. Instead, we're allowing the egos to manifest and new ones to grow, okay, within our psyche in each existence. And that means eventually that we will completely kind of fill up with the egoic aspect of our psyche, and we will become totally mechanical. And that is the point in which we begin to enter into involution, which we talked about with the Wheel of Samsara, where we start to go down. We leave the 108 lives and we start to move downwards. So you can see now the way in which recurrence integrates with the law of return, and both of those are basically carriers, you could say, or holders of the psyche And if a person isn't doing any work, that psychology or psyche will begin to enter into the involution, as we've talked about many times already in the course. So, in other words, we will start to enter involution, whatever happens. And the thing to add on to this is that, again, we'll be talking about it in much more detail next week. And we did talk about it with the ray of death last week, this thing called karma. So the karma we are assigned based on the manifestation of the egos which were in any particular existence. So, for example, if we were a very angry person in that drawing there, where we have the there it says same egos act, that top life there in the example. So you say you've got the dark or the bright green circle. That bright green is related to anger, as an example. Okay. So the person is very angry, and if the ego manifests, the ego of anger manifests such that we impact another person, whether it's physically or emotionally or in some other way, then what we're going to do is generate the associated karma. So karma impacts the recurrence between each life. So we have the manifestation of ego consuming the energy of the human machine, which impacts the recurrence. And also we have the associated karma, which we take from existence to existence. In other words, what we're saying here is recurrence is, yeah, very helpful because it shows us where we are as students of Gnosis. If we keep on coming with the same problems, it shows we have a particular set of egos we need to work on. But at the same time, it shows us that we can, or we have, in a way, we have to change our way of living our life so that we can manage the recurrence, so that hopefully we could perhaps, rather than having a negative recurrence, instead we have something positive. So if we help someone in the last life, we help someone in the next life, perhaps, but with dharma rather than karma. Okay. So we need to be aware in the moment so that we don't waste any particular life that we are in. Now, for all of us, we are here and we are living this life, and none of us knows for sure which life we're in. But we know, the masters tell us, that all of us, humanity in general, all of us are what is known as old souls. In other words, we have been around a long time as a humanity. Each one of us is nearing the 108. We're all around about that point, 105, 108, 10, pick a number. We are around about that. And that means we have now a motive to start applying the practices which we've talked about in this course to begin to positively impact the recurrence we are currently going through. In other words, we have to make the best of what we got here and now. We don't really want to be in a situation where we repeat the same old dramas over and over. If we look at it in another way, if we start to review our life, whether we review it from 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, or even we do the retrospection exercise, it could be that we start to see what will happen tomorrow based on recurrence. Because the egos that we have commitments they have commitments to re-engage with other people's psychology, other people's egos, so that they can manifest. And so you can say, or we can say, that the defects create their own commitments, their own circumstances to enable themselves to manifest. So I'll try and find my button. I've just covered it up. Um, Moving on, we can say that it could be in two particular lives that person A and person B have a particular psychology. Each of them have their own particular psychology. They got their own egos and they've got their free essence. However, they have a commitment to meet because of recurrence and because of return, okay, at any particular event. So they need to meet so that they can express again, so the same argument can take place. And in fact, we can say that the egos we have in our psychology attract and repel other psychologies to enable those same events or dramas to continue or to repeat in different lives. Therefore, we can say in this way, as already discussed, that the ego fortifies itself through time. It becomes stronger with worse consequences unless we do something about it. As we create more defects, our lives will become more complicated, as we've already mentioned. And we then become enslaved to the recurrence. We, as in the essence, that little bit of spark in person A and person B there in the diagram, becomes completely overwhelmed and enslaved to the process of the ego's meeting to re-manifest through a different event of this particular lifetime or existence. So, yes, the recurrence is useful because it shows us our defects on the horizontal path. Remember the horizontal path with the cross? We talked about that. And yes, we will have almost certainly the same friends, the same sorts of jobs. We live in the same country, more or less. We'll more or less be the same age when certain sets of egos come together to repeat a romance or to repeat anger in a fight in a pub or to repeat a dispute with the neighbor, etc. So life, we can say, is a play, and recurrence is a fundamental part of that play, the way in which we live it as a humanity. The returns lead us to conclude that whilst everything in life returns, as we've already said, the planets and everything else, from our point of view, we return between each existence in the wheel of samsara, and we are, if we do no work, psychologically asleep. And we get to a certain point by or through nature, which is that involution we've already talked about, and that links back to the wheel of samsara. Okay, so that's return and recurrence. So I'm going to move everybody over there. Try and do that. Yeah, there we go. Reincarnation. So reincarnation, excuse me, is something which is only attainable by very high beings. In other words, somebody who's done a great work. And in fact, they have totally removed all of their ego, because they are able to choose which physical body they are going to be born into in their next existence. So in that 108 existences on the wheel of samsara in the human kingdom, only very high awakened individuals can choose which body they are going to come back to. That is reincarnation. So when we think about situations like this, people will say, oh, yeah, was Princess Diana, Anne Boleyn reincarnated? Probably not. Okay. It could be return and recurrence, but it is not the same as reincarnation. Only those with totally awakened consciousness can choose to come back into whichever physical body they want to be born into as a baby. You remember we talked about that in the Ray of Death, the way the essence is allocated to the fertilized egg. Do you remember? So that's where we are. They return, the people who reincarnate, return consciously and choose the time and the place of the birth they're going to be in. So they choose the family, the country, the time. Very important. So when people say, oh, yeah, I was, so and so in a past life and everything else like that, maybe you were, but that is not the same as reincarnation. Okay. These people, the people who reincarnate, have no ego. There is essence only in their psychology. And essence is not subject to mechanicity. Essence, we can say consciousness, 100% pure consciousness, is something which cannot be impacted by mechanical laws. Okay, because they've gone beyond that. Who would we be talking about? Who can do that? Well, there's many examples in history, but what we can say in this course with this school is that Master Samael, or full name Master Samael on Vior on the left, and Master Lakshmi Daimon on the right, are two Gnostic masters who have or did choose to reincarnate in their particular physical body at that particular time and place that they did that. So we know, and you can find this online, that Master Samael was, as an example, Julius Caesar. And Master Lakshmi Daimon was, as an example, Socrates. So we can see that people who are very advanced in their work, very advanced in their psychological work in particular, are able to choose to reincarnate. And just to add, in this moment, I'm sure you will probably aware, reincarnation is not the same as resurrection. Resurrection's another topic. Resurrection is obviously for big masters like Jesus the Christ. Okay, so what does that mean for us as students of Gnosis? It means that we need to look at revolution. It's indispensable for us to live in the moment, to awaken consciousness, and to avoid falling into the same errors in that recurrence and in that return, which means it leads us back to all the practices we learnt at the beginning of the course. Key soul, self-remembrance, and then the observer and the observed. And then moving on from that, asking our Divine Mother to apply death in motion, and then to apply the psychological death in that practice we talked about together, the long practice, which we included the retrospection. Okay, so those three factors are fundamental in allowing us to achieve the psychological revolution that we need to be able to get to a state where we can leave the laws of return and recurrence. Okay. And in that way, we live our life consciously. If we, in our psychological work, eliminate any particular ego, then we attract different circumstances to us, obviously. If we eliminate any particular aspect of the ego of, say, for example, gluttony, then we are not going to have those same issues, say, regarding chocolate biscuits or cream cakes or anorexia or whatever. Okay. Could be that we can eliminate those aspects from our psychology, free up the corresponding essence or consciousness so that we can be revolutionary, the radical change. We've talked about this many times before. The mystical death is to eliminate those parts from inside us we don't want, which are all those egos. The birth is to do with the management of our energies, and the sacrifice is to consciously share what we have learnt with other people. Okay. And the eye in the middle of the triangle is supposed to be the awakened consciousness. We need to awaken what free consciousness we already have. Okay. So hopefully you have all understood that. And we're going to move on now to one. You asked a few weeks ago if we could do conjurations, because conjurations help us in our daily life and in particularly in the astral world when we come to places or see things we don't want to be at. So let's talk about those first, okay? So I'm moving on. Conjurations and the circle of protection. So this, unfortunately, as you can see, is like an extract from a typed kind of bit of paper I have. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to create it in a lovely way. It's just as it is. It's a scan in. But mantra Berlin. Okay. So the mantra Berlin, as you can see, is there to provide us with a and defend us with a powerful weapon, as the master's saying there, defend us from any entity we may discover. If we have a feeling in our dreams that something is watching us or chasing us, we can pronounce this mantra. We can pronounce this mantra in daytime if we want. We can pronounce it, obviously not in front of other people, so they think we're a bit weird. We might just pronounce this mantra quietly to ourselves or even internally, but it is sung. The mantra itself, when we can do it, it is sung. And I'll tell you about when or how we would integrate this in our daily life a bit later on. But you can see there, it says it is sung this way. So the belilin is stretched out where it says belilin like that. Okay. And belilin is a force or energy which is there to help us. And this particular conjuration, the mantra Belilin, was given to Master Samael by the angel Arok. Okay. And you pronounce it like this. Belilin. 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 Amphor of salvation. I would like to be next to you. Materialism has no strength next to me. Belilin. 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 Okay, and as you can see, you pronounce that 3 times. Now, you will find online different versions of this. You can even find versions of Master Samael singing this. Okay. What I just told you was the way we contemporarily pronounce this mantra. That way I just told you is the way we do it now, these days. Okay. But there is uh extracts and recordings and bits and pieces on the web you can find which have it slightly different. Don't worry. The way I did it is the way we do it. Okay. So as you can see there, it says there are some times when, for instance, an entity gets our tongue tied or we cannot speak or we can pronounce it mentally if we want. Okay. And it is done um, so that we can pronounce it, whether it's in the physical or in the astral. Okay. It's very powerful. And as you can see, excuse me, as you can see, it says, sing the mantra, you vocalize it 3 times. Okay, so that's the mantra Belelin. It's a conjuration. Okay, I'm going to carry on. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to pick it all up later. Right, so the top one first, as you can see, it's out of the same book or piece of paper. Whenever we see an entity we don't want to see or don't want to be near, you stand firm like a soldier. Put your left hand on the solar plexus. You know where the solar plexus is? It's at the base of the ribs, above the navel. Put your left hand there. Your right hand forward, as you can see, with those 3 fingers extended like that, but turned this way. And you imagine that through these fingers comes fire. And you say this with a bit of vigor, with a bit of force, because you are using that fire to conjure the entity that you don't want to be there. Okay, it's going to push it away. Okay, so you say it with force and you say it with faith, and you know it's going to work. In the name of Jupiter, father of the gods, I conjure you, te vigos cos slim. Okay, and you say it with strength and with energy, and any sinister entity will depart. No entity can resist one of those conjurations. And yeah, it definitely does work. So when you're in the astral, you can apply that conjuration. Okay, the conjuration of Jupiter. Okay, hopefully that's straightforward for you all. So the next one we did talk about a few weeks ago, very simple. If we're in the astral and find ourselves in a place we don't like, or we feel nervous or edgy and we feel a bit panicky or whatever, then we can just pronounce this again, clearly, again, with faith, and just say Christ, Christ, Christ. And again, that will disperse the situation. The entity will leave and you will be fine to carry on with your astral experience, your dream, or whatever you're doing in the astral. Okay. Again, this will all be in the recording on the web page, so you'll get all this there. So I'm going to move on to the next bit now. Hopefully, you're all okay. So this is called a magic circle, and you could say a magic circle of protection. Okay, I'll read it. The fact is that the powers we had, well, when we fell, we lost everything. That's when humanity fell out of Eden. Okay, that's when we came into the 3-dimensional physical world. This is all very much high, uh, you could say, high teaching, which we'll talk about another time. But we don't have the faculty for the for all the elemental entities of our own organism to obey us. In other words, we have, and we talked about this before a few weeks ago, we have an aspect of our inner being or inner world called our elemental intercessor. The elemental intercessor, as it says in the name, intercedes between us and the elementals that we are working with in any particular um, piece of work we're doing. And if you remember, we did that shower practice a few weeks ago where we talked about we can clean the physical and vital body with the help of the elementals and working with the elemental intercessor. So as you can see, it says, so then we have to resort to the intimate, the inner father to order the elementals, excuse me, the elemental intercessor to do that work. Okay. So in other words, we are going to ask our inner father to order the elemental intercessor to do the magic circle. All right. So when we are going to bed and you want to lie down, leaving your body protected against any entity, because you are going to do either sleeping or astral projecting, you're either going to leave your physical body consciously or not. Either way, you're going to leave your physical body. So the first thing you need to do is conjure the room where you are going to rest. So when you say, when the master says conjure the room, he means pronounce the mantra Belilin in the room where you're going to rest. Pronounce the mantra Belilin 3 times, like we've already said. And then he says, secondly, you lie down and you spend a moment praying to your inner father or inner mother, and then you say, my Father, my God, I beg you with my soul and my heart to order my elemental intercessor to draw a magic circle around my bed. You could say for the room or the house or whatever you choose. Okay, so that no sinister entity can damage my body. And you do that 3 times. And just to be clear, you need to do it with certainty that you're not going to have people or cats or anything else coming in breaking the circle. If you're going to draw a circle around the house, you need to make sure that nobody else is going to come in, another member of the family. Or if you're going to do it in your room, you need to make sure that no one comes into you don't plan for anybody to come into your room later. So, in other words, you need to be a bit sensible about where you draw the magic circle around the room, around the house, or whatever. Okay. And you pronounce this mantra or this phrase, this petition 3 times. And when you're lying on your bed, you don't, what he's saying there when he says you are not moving from there. Okay. Once you've decided to make the circle, you're not going to break the circle. You're not going to leave the bed. You're not going to leave the room. Okay. And you imagine, what do you imagine? You imagine the circle being drawn around the bed or the room or the house or whatever. Okay. And you imagine the elemental intercessor as a small boy with a sword drawing a circle of energy around the bed or the room or whatever it is. Okay. And as Master says, to imagine is to see. So as we imagine that process, as we imagine that circle being done around us, then it is being done around us. Okay. So that's the magic circle of protection. And you can see that it works in conjunction with the Belilin. So we would do the Belilin first, and then we would do the circle of protection. We would not do it the other way round. We would not do the circle of protection and then do the Belilin because any entities in the room couldn't get out because you've drawn the circle of protection. It would be stuck in there. So you need to do the Belilin first to clear the room, and then you do this petition to seal the room, to protect the room that you're in, or the bed, or the house, whatever you choose. So how would that look? Well, it would look like this. We would again pronounce Belilin, Belilin, Belilin. Amphora of salvation, I would like to be near to you. Materialism has no strength next to me. Belly lean, belly lean, belly lean. Let me pronounce that 3 times. And then using our conscious imagination, construct the circle around the entire inside walls of our house or the room or the bed with luminous fire. And we say, my Father, my Lord, my God, I beg you with my soul and with my heart to order my elemental intercessor to draw a magic circle of protection around this house or whatever, so that no sinister entity can damage my body. Repeat that 3 times. And as you do that, imagine the elemental intercessor, who looks like a small boy, drawing this luminous circle around the walls of the house with the sword around you, whatever it is. And then afterwards, always thank your inner father when you finish. Thank your inner father for this work. This is, you could say, high magic. We're beginning to get into the very sort of mystical aspect. If you remember way back in one of the first lectures, we talked about the 4 pillars of wisdom. We talked about art, philosophy, science, and mysticism. This is very much a mixture of science because of what we're doing, and we need to verify what we're doing, but also mysticism. That mysticism is something we need to uh, uh, have faith in, that our divine inner mother and inner father are going to help us with these practices. They're going to help us and protect us in the work that we are doing here. Okay. So if we decide we're going to go for the astral, whichever time, tonight or in the afternoon or in the morning, whenever, okay, find a room, a bed or settee, whatever, and do these 2 conjurations and the circle of protection, the Belilin, and then the circle. And then when we're in the astral, we can apply those other conjurations. We talked about the Christ, 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 and then we talked about the conjuration of Jupiter. Remember, Te Vigos Koslim. Okay. We need to apply them as and when we need to in our astral journey. Or it could even be that we're there in the astral world and we're not having an astral projection, but we feel uncomfortable about the dream we're having. We can still apply those same conjurations, but with faith and with force to help us and protect us. Okay, I think let's see where we are. Yeah, that's the end. So I'm going to stop